This is my experience 20 years later living in Charlotte, North Carolina. Let's talk about it now. So I'll never forget this day for the rest of my life. I was a 22-year-old kid. I had graduated college and I'm in Rochester, New York, my hometown. It's 6:30 in the morning and I'm getting ready to go to work. I'm brushing the snow off the car. The wind is blowing that snow right back in my face. And it was in that exact moment I had the epiphany. I had to get out of these New York winters. And I'd gone to college at Campbell University, which is in North Carolina, and I had a great experience there. But outside of that experience there, I really didn't know exactly where I would move if I was going to move back down south. Well, this was back in 2003, and I just kept hearing a lot of really good things about Charlotte in terms of like the job market and obviously the weather and things like that. And so I just put a pin in the map and said, I'm moving to Charlotte, North Carolina. I didn't have a job. I'd saved up a little bit of money, and that was about it. I packed everything else in the back of my Ford Explorer and I hightailed it down south. Crashed on a buddy's couch for a couple weeks before he said, hey man, you want to rent the room? And I decided to rent a room in the house that we were at. Got a job a couple months later, and the rest is history. It's been a crazy, crazy 20 years. The city was awesome back in 2003, and 20 years later, here we are. It's even better with more awesome things to come. Back in 2003, I thought Charlotte was the biggest city in the country compared to where I came from. I went to a really, really small school in the middle of nowhere, North Carolina. Rochester, New York is a good sized town, but it's not that big. So to me, Charlotte seemed big and had so much going on. Well, what's interesting is I'm a big sports guy. The Charlotte Knights, for example, they were down in Fort Mill 20 years ago. Now they're beautiful stadium, uptown Charlotte. The Charlotte Hornets, they were the Hornets. Then they moved to New Orleans and became the Pelicans. Then they moved back to Charlotte and became the Bobcats, and now they're the Hornets again. That's how long it's been. That's just one example of the type of changes in the Charlotte area. There was no light rail. So going from Pineville to the university area on a train, that didn't exist. There was only one section of 485 that existed, and now you can go all the way around the entire city. The skyline of Charlotte looks completely different today than it did 20 years ago. I remember the Hearst Tower, which is now Truist, and I also remember the Bank of America building. Those were the two biggest buildings, and now we have a skyline full of sky rises. That's just one example. South End. South End didn't exist in the way that it exists today. There was no Waverly down in Ballantyne area. There was very little up in the Huntersville area, especially Birkdale Village and all that. There's just been so much that's happened over the past 20 years, and it's literally happened in every direction of the city. It's been awesome to see. I think one of the fun things for me is to see how the city has really grown in terms of the different areas and the different pockets of town that exist today or are just way more vibrant today than they were 20 years ago. I look at parts of town like Noda. Noda's always been cool and hip and had a lot going on, but it's even cooler and more hip, and there's even more things going on. And you've seen just a ton of development in a neighborhood or area of town like that. You've also, if you look at the west side of town, you have these little pocket neighborhoods like Severville, Biddleville, Wesley Heights. These little pocket neighborhoods, they've just exploded with different options. There's multi-family homes, so there can be a little bit more density, more people living in those areas. And with that, now you have retail options, and you have dining options, and you have breweries, and you have just a lot of cool, fun things to do. There have been more investments in infrastructure, so we have easier ways to get around town, whether it's through walking trails or biking trails or ways that you can use the electric scooters and things like that. So there's just so many awesome ways to get around town and little cool pocket areas. If you go out even further from town, I mean, Ballantyne is just blown up. If you look at Ballantyne today versus what it was 20 years ago, there is so much to do. I look at just one development like Waverly, which is a massive development, but Waverly didn't exist 20 years ago. And so you see all these different things, and it's not just isolated to a 2-3 mile radius of the center city of uptown Charlotte. really now if you live in Fort Mill, if you live on the west side of town, maybe you're in that Belmont area, or if you're north of town in that Huntersville, or even further like Cornelius, or you could be out east closer to Monroe. It's funny because people really consider all that Charlotte, even though technically you may be in a smaller town or something like that. The reality is Charlotte really has spread to where even if you live in some of those different areas and even a different state like being in Fort Mill, you still feel like you're in the greater Charlotte area. So what's really been cool to see over the past 20 years is to see just how many people continue to move to the area and how many more things there are to do today than there were even 5 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. So Charlotte's always had a really awesome outdoor scene with parks and things like that to do outside. But today we have things like the rail trail, which are great for running, walking, biking. It takes you all the way through the South End, Loso areas. We also have the Greenway. The Greenway is a 19-mile connector basically from the North Carolina-South Carolina border all the way up to NODA. We also have things like the Whitewater Center. The Whitewater Center is epic. If you've ever had a chance to spend a couple hours or even a day or so out there, there's just so much to do. And we've also seen the growth of things like Carowinds. Carowinds was always a great theme park, and now it's even bigger with many more attractions. So the area has really continued to appeal to so many people on such a broad area. I mean, now we have indoor putting bars, we have pickleball courts all over the place, we have all sorts of indoor and outdoor activities that you can do from early morning all the way till the late evening. Charlotte's really improved in that area. So 20 years ago, I was 23, single, looking for a job, looking for a place to plant roots. And so for any of you OGs out there that remember places like, I don't know, Vinny's on South Boulevard, maybe you remember Dixie's Tavern or Grand Central or Cannes, or maybe you remember the first bar crawl, the first Rich and Bennett bar crawl uptown that I think it had, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 people tops. These are the types of things that we were doing back then. And it was awesome. We were getting to know people, and many of us were young in our careers, and we were just establishing ourselves here in this great city. And now it's been awesome. 20 years later, not only have we grown as individuals and we've found different passions and different things that we've enjoyed doing, but we have more options at our disposal. I think the coolest thing for me has been basically to grow up with a city. So when I moved here, I was 23, single, just trying to establish myself in a career, plant roots, make friends, create networks, and hopefully lasting relationships. And I feel like I've definitely done that. And along the way, I've grown as a person. So I have established that career. I have a family now. I have kids. We have so many things that we can do. We're at the ball fields, or we're at a special event this side of town or that side of town. And as a parent and having young kids now, there's just so many fun things and activities that we can do as a family and with these kids, and things that we could show them today that weren't available 20 years ago. And at the same time, if you're still that young professional person looking for that fun thing to do, you've got 10 times the options. And so it's been really fun to grow up with a city. It's been fun to mature and become more sophisticated and to enjoy different things and different experiences and be in a city that has basically done the same exact thing. They've grown up, they've matured, they've become sophisticated, and their eye is on continuing to see that forward. So I think in a lot of ways we've grown up together, and it's really been a fun thing to be a part of. As awesome as the past 20 years have been, I'm even more excited about where the city's going, because we have a city in an area that's full of so many great people and so many great ideas. And really, I think it's a perfect blend of folks that have born and raised here, that care about the integrity and the history and the character of the city, people that have come from different parts of the country that can bring different ideas and different fresh perspectives on things. And when you bring those things together, there's just incredible opportunity. And Charlotte still has so much bandwidth for growth. I think there's a strong vision. And because of all that, Charlotte has so much to offer, and I think the future could not be any brighter.